The Millionaire CEO arrives at an exclusive winter auction, but he never imagined he had a son and that he was at the event. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Grant Morgan stepped out of the sleek, obsidian-toned car onto a strip of rolled-out carpet that glistened with melting snow. Camera flashes burst around him like fireworks in the crisp winter night, and the flashbulbs sent bright reflections dancing off the venue's tall, frosted windows. He paused for just a moment, collecting himself, before facing the throng of reporters. The swirling cold air stung his lungs, and the hush that fell over the nearby crowd felt oddly tense, almost as if everyone had been waiting for him to arrive. A small team of publicists and assistants, each wearing matching wool coats, hurried to flank him, eager to shield him from probing questions. Grant offered the cameras a practiced half-smile. He was dressed impeccably, in a dark navy suit layered under a tailored winter overcoat. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone used to controlling a room. But tonight he sensed something strange in the air. He could read an undercurrent of unease in the expressions of the staff and the occasional wary glances from other attendees. It felt different from his usual philanthropic galas, boardroom negotiations, and weekend gatherings with elite investors. "Mr. Morgan, is it true you're here to outbid everyone for the Sienna collection?" shouted one journalist, leaning forward with a microphone. Grant merely inclined his head. "We'll see how the evening goes," he said, voice smooth and noncommittal. His arrival had already stirred enough curiosity. He didn't intend to amplify it by making grand statements. Another reporter, a bit pushier, tried to draw him into personal questions. "Grant, any comment on the rumors?" "Pardon me," he interrupted politely, stepping aside so that his assistant, Camilla, could block further inquiries. Press coverage was inevitable, but he refused to be cornered into answering anything that might fuel speculation. After all, he was there for one reason: a rare art piece that was supposed to be the highlight of this exclusive winter auction. His company had recently ventured into high-end art investments, and picking up a prized collectible here would seal a lucrative deal with an important client. That was the plan. As soon as he entered the grand lobby, the warmth of the interior enveloped him. Rich gold lights sparkled across polished floors, and the opulent decor rivaled the ambiance of a royal ballroom. A swirl of elegantly dressed guests conversed behind tall glasses of champagne, their voices echoing against the high ceilings. Despite the outward lavishness, Grant immediately sensed an odd quiet running beneath the polite small talk and the rustle of evening gowns. Winston, a longtime acquaintance who often worked these social circuits, wove his way through the crowd to greet him. "Grant," he said with a brisk handshake, "glad you made it." Grant lifted an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." Winston hesitated, his gaze flicking to a corner of the lobby where a group of suits murmured among themselves. "I figured you might pass on an event this tense." "Tense?" Grant gave a small, wry laugh. "All auctions are tense, especially when prices soar past 7 figures. Winston glanced over his shoulder again. "Still, watch yourself. There are whispers of problems brewing. Could be nothing, but it's not the usual crowd tonight." Grant felt a slight tug of apprehension. He thanked Winston for the tip and ventured deeper into the venue. He recognized some key industry figures scattered about: old money collectors, brand-new tech millionaires, and representatives from major galleries. One face in particular stood out in the swirl of conversation: a man named Darius. Tall, with slicked-back hair and an impeccable burgundy suit, Darius cut an imposing figure as he mingled, occasionally throwing cool smiles in Grant's direction. They had encountered each other a few times before, always in circles of high finance. Though he didn't know Darius intimately, Grant recalled hearing rumors about questionable deals and strong-arm tactics. A quiet voice in Grant's head whispered caution. As he strolled around, politely accepting greetings, Grant noticed the event staff seemed oddly on edge. They whispered quietly among themselves, glancing toward the main hallway that led backstage. When he tried to catch an organizer's attention about the auction schedule, the young woman stiffened and rushed off, eyes darting nervously behind him as though she feared being overheard. The entire situation made him more certain that Winston's warning of problems wasn't just idle chatter. He paused in front of a grand display of the items set to be auctioned that night. One painting especially captured his gaze, a sweeping impressionist cityscape with deep emerald hues. This was the Siena collection piece he'd come to win, a statement piece for his growing cultural portfolio. But even as he studied it, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hair on the back of his neck prickled, as though a pair of eyes were fixated on him from somewhere in the crowd. A wave of hush fell momentarily across the room, and Grant turned to see Darius approaching with a carefully poised grin. "Well, if it isn't Grant Morgan," Darius said, extending a hand. His voice was so smooth it bordered on oily. "Heard you might be going after that Siena painting. High stakes, I presume?" Grant shook his hand firmly. "Collecting fine art is more than money, Darius. It's an investment in culture." "Ah, culture," Darius repeated, giving a thin-lipped smile. "Of course. But everything has a price, wouldn't you agree? Even culture." Grant wasn't sure if it was a philosophical statement or something more pointed. "I'm sure it does," he replied, "though some things are priceless." Darius's grin lingered a second too long. There was something unsettling in the way he held Grant's gaze. "I'll catch you later," he said at last, stepping away with an air of victory, as though he'd already won something undisclosed. Grant exhaled slowly, turning his attention back to the swirl of chatter and movement. He wanted to shrug off that strange encounter, but it seemed to confirm that Darius had some kind of agenda. The possibility of sabotage flickered through his mind. He'd dealt with blackmailers, cutthroat investors, and even media sharks in the past, but there was a different edge to the tension tonight, a sense of personal intrigue that made his skin prickle. He migrated toward the main auction hall, where rows of elegantly draped chairs faced a small stage. The chandeliers glimmered overhead, shimmering light across the polished floors. On stage, a conservator was carefully positioning the next item up for bidding. Grant scanned the seats, noticing more unfamiliar faces than he expected at such a niche event. The hush grew heavier here, as though everyone waited with bated breath for something dramatic to happen. A light tap at his shoulder made him turn. Camilla, his assistant, murmured softly, "We've set aside your seat near the front. People are expecting you to make a statement with your bid." He nodded, following her to the reserved row. "Something's off," he whispered to her as he sat. She pressed her lips together. "You're not the only one who thinks so. Journalists are sniffing around for dirt. One even asked me if you had a secret scandal about to break." His jaw tensed. "It's probably rumor-mongering. Let them talk." He tried to settle in but couldn't ignore the nagging sense that he was sitting on a powder keg. Nearby, Winston gave him a subtle nod, as if to confirm that the tension was still there, and so were the watchful eyes. Darius took his seat across the aisle, whispering something to a companion and glancing at Grant with the faintest smirk. Grant refused to acknowledge him, instead fixing his gaze straight ahead. The lights flickered, indicating the first official items were about to be presented. Music swelled from hidden speakers, and everyone quieted. The crisp voice of the auctioneer welcomed the guests and launched into practiced remarks about the philanthropic causes the event would support. Applause broke out politely in the corners of the room. Through it all, Grant couldn't shake the strange heaviness on his shoulders, like a warning, unspoken, but all too real. At a break in the auctioneer's speech, Grant rose from his seat, suddenly needing a breath of fresh air. He slipped to the side of the hall, past tall, gold-framed mirrors and an arrangement of winter-white roses. Just as he stepped into the dimly lit foyer, something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. A woman with elegant posture and raven-black braids walked down a corridor leading to the backstage area, her long dress brushing the marble floor. His heart gave a jolt. For an instant he thought he recognized the tilt of her chin, the way her shoulders moved. She vanished behind a gilded door before he could confirm it. He clenched his fists by his sides, uncertain why that fleeting glimpse seized him so strongly. It couldn't be. No, it had been years. And yet, a faint echo of memory tugged at him, leaving him distinctly uneasy. Trying to steady his breathing, he stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, his mind whirring with half-formed questions. Summoning his composure, he drifted back into the main hall. The auctioneer was introducing the first piece. Grant eased into his chair, but an electric current of tension now coursed through him. He observed the crowd with renewed scrutiny, scanning each row for the woman. It was impossible to believe he'd stumbled upon an old memory by pure coincidence. For a man who prided himself on always being in control, he felt disturbingly unsure of what might happen next. A staff member directed the stage lights onto the item up for bidding. The audience hushed in anticipation. As the auctioneer began the opening call, Grant's pulse pounded. Over the buzz of excited chatter, he thought he saw a slight movement from the far side near the curtains. His eyes flicked in that direction, and there she was again. That same poised figure, turning her head just enough for him to catch a glimpse of her face. Grant felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. As the first bid begins, he catches another fleeting glimpse of the woman from his past, Vanessa, just before she disappears behind a curtain. Grant blinked under the bright lights, fighting to refocus on the auction now in progress. His mind still reeled from that momentary glimpse backstage. He was almost certain he had seen Vanessa. That possibility tightened a knot of tension in his chest. He told himself he must be mistaken, yet the way her figure had vanished behind the curtain nagged at him like an old memory determined to resurface. "Ladies and gentlemen, the next item for your consideration." The auctioneer's voice drifted over him, but he heard nothing of the specifics. He was too busy scanning the rows of onlookers in the front section, searching for any clue that might confirm his suspicion. Every now and then, camera flashes flared, capturing the excitement of the high-stakes bidding. In the corner, though, he caught sight of someone else who demanded his attention, Darius. Leaning casually against a pillar near the side of the room, Darius looked like a cat that had just stumbled onto a bowl of cream. He seemed more amused than ever, his gaze fixed on Grant with a smug half-smile. Grant feigned indifference. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation in front of the entire crowd, not when he wasn't even sure what exactly might be fueling Darius's swagger. He took a seat, nodding politely at the fellow bidders around him. The auctioneer's gavel rapped out the final call for a piece that didn't interest Grant. Polite applause followed, then a short intermission before the next round. Soft music filtered in. People rose to stretch, mingle, or step outside for a breath of the chilly air. Grant did the opposite. He worked his way toward the stage, hoping for a discreet peek behind the curtain. If Vanessa really was here, he needed to confirm it. His heart thudded with a peculiar mix of longing and dread at the thought of facing her after so many years. She was the one chapter in his life he had never properly closed. He'd only gone a few steps, though, when Darius casually slid into his path. "Leaving so soon?" Darius asked in a low tone, voice barely above a murmur. Grant paused, keeping his composure. "Just need to stretch my legs." Darius arched an eyebrow. Of course. Events like this can be so stifling. Grant couldn't read whether Darius was making small talk or setting him up for something bigger. Instead of responding, he attempted to sidestep. But Darius moved in sync, blocking him again with a deliberately casual stance. "You're not curious why I'm here?" Darius asked at length, that knowing smirk returning. Grant studied him. "Can't say it's top of my list." "Oh, come now." Darius chuckled softly, though there was no warmth in it. "Let's not be coy. I know you've got your sights set on that Sienna painting. I might have information that could be helpful. Let's call it a friendly tip." Grant had no intention of jumping into any sort of deal with Darius without understanding his motives. "Appreciate the offer, but I'll manage on my own." Darius gave a theatrical sigh. "Then you'll miss out. Shame. This secret of mine is something you'd want to hear. Something personal." Grant's stomach lurched. The mention of something personal told him Darius was playing a dangerous game. Memories of a younger Grant, fresh out of college, flashed in his mind. The only personal secret that could possibly matter to someone like Darius was... Grant forced a calm, polite smile. "Excuse me," he said, stepping back. "I have to take care of a matter." Darius only winked in reply and slipped away, leaving Grant unsettled. A fresh wave of chatter signaled that the intermission was almost over. The next auctioned items would be coming up soon, and the crowd began drifting back to their seats. Grant scanned the back corridor, half expecting to see that familiar figure. Then, beneath the soft overhead light, he spotted a staff member wearing a crisp uniform. The young woman was adjusting a heavy curtain where that same silhouette had disappeared earlier. Summoning a professional yet gentle tone, he approached her. "Pardon me, I'm Grant Morgan," he said. "I'm trying to find the event organizer. I'd like to confirm scheduling details for the last items up for bid." Her eyes flicked to him with startled recognition. "Oh, yes, of course, Mr. Morgan. The new organizer is in a meeting right now, but I believe she'll be on stage soon to welcome our sponsors. If you head to the foyer, she should be there within a few minutes." Grant thanked her, hoping his disappointment didn't show. With no other clear lead, he ventured into the foyer. Several large displays of art and sculpture lined the space, and the hush of hushed conversation hovered in the corners. At a tall podium near the center, a small group of elegantly dressed people stood discussing last-minute changes. Grant recognized Winston among them, exchanging whispered remarks with another man in a black suit. "I was hoping to see you again," Grant said, approaching Winston from behind. Winston turned, relief flooding his face. "Ah, you made it through the crowd. Everything all right?" Grant kept his tone easy. "Fine. Just feeling like there's a bigger story unfolding here than an art auction." Winston glanced over Grant's shoulder, checking for eavesdroppers. "I've heard bits and pieces. Hush-hush blackmail. People whispering the new organizer has some old score to settle with an investor. Could be Darius, but I'm not certain. Tread carefully." Grant's pulse kicked up again, though he tried to hide it. "You know her name?" Winston eyed him curiously. "Vanessa. Vanessa Monroe, I believe. She's been with the event's administrative team for a while, but only recently took charge." Hearing her name out loud hit him like a punch to the gut, confirming what he'd feared. Vanessa Monroe. It was real. She was here, in this building, after all these years. He swallowed hard. "All right. Thanks for the tip." Just then, a wave of subtle movement rippled through the guests. Several heads turned toward the back entrance of the foyer. Grant followed their line of sight. Sure enough, Vanessa stepped into view. She wore a sleek, floor-length gown that shimmered under the overhead lighting. Her braids, woven with golden accents, caught the light as she paused to speak with a small cluster of sponsors. Watching her from afar, Grant felt his breath catch. She was older than he remembered, of course. Time had shaped her features into something more refined, a quiet strength in the way she held herself. But the cool grace in her stance, the thoughtful focus in her eyes, these were unmistakably the same. He found himself rooted in place, uncertain if he should approach or wait until she finished her discussion. A polite hush fell over the foyer as she cleared her throat to make an announcement. "Welcome, everyone. We'll resume the auction in just a few minutes. I'd like to remind our esteemed guests to have their bidder information ready for the final items of the evening. Thank you for your cooperation and generosity tonight." Her voice was steady, professional, but he heard an undercurrent of tension. Their gazes nearly collided across the space. Grant caught his breath, and Vanessa froze for the briefest second, her expression flickering in recognition. But instead of acknowledging him, She gave a curt nod and spun to return to the main hall. A swirl of confusion washed over Grant. Why hadn't she said anything, even a polite greeting? After all, they had been so close once. He wanted answers, but each new moment only raised more questions. As the minutes passed, guests began filing back into the auction hall, following the event's schedule. The ambiance dipped from casual mingling to the formal hush of high-stakes bidding once more. Darius strutted in last, casually adjusting his cuffs, as though to remind Grant he could appear anywhere at any time. Grant avoided his gaze, taking a seat near the front again. The auctioneer brought out the next series of items, and the hum of competitive bidding filled the air. Spotlights panned across the stage as attendants showed off each work of art. Now and then, Grant's eyes wandered in search of Vanessa. He spotted her in the wings, leaning over to speak with someone who looked like security. She seemed preoccupied, her expression serious, lips pressed thin. Between bids, Winston passed by and discreetly dropped off a note on Grant's seat. Grant opened it. "Darius is pressuring investors. Be on alert. People are whispering about a secret he plans to use." Grant exhaled slowly, resisting the surge of anger pounding in his chest. He carefully folded the note. If Darius had somehow gleaned details about Vanessa or about their past, maybe that was his leverage. But the question remained, how did Vanessa fit into all this? And why did she look so guarded, so distant? The bidding droned on, culminating in applause as the hammer fell on another expensive piece. During this lull, Grant rose to stretch his legs once more. This time he drifted to an alcove near the back, a discreet vantage point where he could observe the staff corridor. His instincts buzzed. If he wanted answers, he might find them there. Sure enough, within a few minutes, Vanessa appeared, quietly leading someone by the hand. It was a little boy with hair as dark as midnight, perhaps 4 years old, big, curious eyes scanning the busy corridor. Grant's heart skipped at the sight of them together, Vanessa with her hand protectively on the child's shoulder, pointing out which path to take. She knelt to whisper in the boy's ear, handing him what looked like a small toy or key. The child held on to it carefully, trusting her every word. Grant remained hidden, uncertain what he felt. Surprise flickered through him. He'd never pictured Vanessa with children, never suspected she might have started a family. She looked around, cautious, then spotted Grant from across the hallway. Their eyes locked. For a moment her expression wavered, yet she gently stood and guided the child toward a secure door, a place for staff, presumably. Grant noticed how gently she opened it and ushered him inside before stepping in after him. As she did, the boy glanced back. He had the widest, most curious eyes that seemed strangely familiar. Grant watches from across the room as Vanessa talks quietly with a young boy, then gently ushers him behind a secure door. The child glances back with wide, curious eyes that seem strangely familiar. Grant paused in the quiet corridor, gaze locked on the closed door through which Vanessa and the little boy had vanished. A persistent instinct told him not to leave things at that, but as he took a step forward, hoping to follow, a polite staff member stepped in his path. "Excuse me, Mr. Morgan," she said in a low voice. "The next set of items is about to begin, and the organizers need the guests seated." She offered a polite, insistent smile. "We'd appreciate it if you could return to the main hall." He had no choice but to step back. Reluctantly, he let her guide him away from the door, though curiosity and worry knotted in his stomach. Making his way into the main hall, he found the mood somehow tenser than before, as if everyone sensed something simmering beneath the elegant veneer. The lights dimmed slightly, and a hush draped the crowd. A series of new pieces, sculptures this time, were wheeled forward and displayed under carefully arranged spotlights. The auctioneer's amplified voice cut through the stillness, summoning bids that escalated faster than usual. Clearly, many of these collectors were anxious to leave with something rare, and money was no obstacle. Grant slipped into his seat beside Winston, who appeared a bit edgy himself. Winston cast a sideways glance, confirming Grant's suspicion that tonight was not proceeding like a typical art event. As the bids soared, Winston leaned closer. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Grant," he murmured. Grant kept his focus on the stage. "Not exactly, but you mentioned that Vanessa only recently took over the auctions organization, right?" "That's right," Winston replied. "It happened a few months back, apparently. She was an assistant before that, but the company's board elevated her position. I assume she has powerful supporters, though it's odd she's carrying so much responsibility. And from what I hear, this event is more high pressure than anyone expected." Grant chewed on Winston's words in silence. He noticed how Vanessa was nowhere to be found on stage now. One of her team members had replaced her, introducing the sculptures to the bidders. Another staffer hovered to the side, showing a slight tremor whenever Darius strolled past, as though even his presence was enough to unnerve people. The cycle of bidding concluded, applause rang out, and the crowd broke into murmurs as the auctioneer announced a brief pause before revealing the next set. Grant stood, hoping to catch Vanessa or at least glean more information, when Darius materialized at his elbow with disconcerting ease. "Mr. Morgan," Darius drawled, gesturing for him to follow. "A word in private?" Grant had no desire to engage with Darius, but ignoring him would draw even more suspicion. So, with a clipped nod, he let Darius lead him into a lounge just off the main foyer. Plush chairs, gold-framed mirrors, and a low-polished coffee table offered an air of refined luxury, at odds with the tension crackling between them. Inside, two of Darius's associates stood at the walls, arms folded. Grant eyed them coldly. "So," Darius began, strolling around the room as if he owned it, "this auction is turning out to be quite interesting, don't you think?" "Cut to the chase," Grant said. He could hear his own pulse, tight with impatience. Darius feigned a gracious nod. "I've come to offer you an opportunity. You're a visionary in the tech world, always looking to expand. I have certain international channels that would open countless doors for you. Of course, in return, I'd need a few small favors. Nothing too difficult." Grant braced himself. This was exactly the scenario he'd been warned about. A shady side deal with questionable legality. "I don't sign on to clandestine schemes. Any deals I make go through legitimate channels, and you know that." Darius arched an eyebrow, then shrugged with a lazy smile. "Legitimate channels are so tedious, though, aren't they? And we both know you might have more personal concerns to worry about right now. What was that child's name again?" Grant's expression hardened. "Whatever you think you know, keep it to yourself." "And if I don't?" Darius spread his arms, that smug grin never wavering. "Word spreads quickly about men who hide secrets, particularly secrets that paint them as irresponsible, maybe even cold-hearted." Grant's anger flared. "I've dealt with blackmailers before. This won't end well for you." "Is that a threat?" Darius asked, feigning surprise. "No, it's a promise," Grant replied, voice low. A tense silence stretched out between them before Darius sighed, eyeing his two men by the walls. They moved aside, letting Grant pass. "Think on it," Darius murmured, shrugging casually. "I'll be here all evening." Grant turned on his heel, not caring about a polite exit. He left the lounge, shoulders tight with pent-up frustration. The second he stepped into the corridor, he nearly collided with Leo, who was guiding Vanessa along gently by her elbow. She looked visibly shaken, her face tight, her eyes reflecting a fear she was trying to hide. "Everything okay?" Grant asked, trying to keep his tone even. Leo answered for her, voice calm but firm. "It's handled. Just some of Darius's men getting too pushy with the staff. I had to set them straight." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself, then pulled away from Leo's supportive grip. She tried to restore her cool, professional stance. Grant, though, saw how her hand trembled at her side. He couldn't hold back his questions any longer. "Vanessa, why are you here? Why do you keep avoiding me?" Her gaze flicked to his, and for a heartbeat, pain flashed across her features. Then she squared her shoulders, a determined edge to her voice. "I'm not avoiding you, Grant. I'm working. I have responsibilities." "Responsibilities like organizing a dangerous auction?" he pushed. "What do you need from me? Is Darius threatening you?" She lifted her chin. "I don't need anything from you. Stay focused on your business, Grant, and keep me out of it." Her words cut deep. Before he could answer, she turned away, walking briskly down the corridor. Leo eyed Grant apologetically, then followed her, leaving him alone with the echo of her cold dismissal. Part of him wanted to chase after her, demand an explanation. Another part whispered that he had no right to force answers out of her, especially after the way things ended between them years ago. Still, he recalled the boy he'd spotted earlier. The child's name, he'd learned by overhearing a staffer, was Ethan. In the main backstage lounge, where a few staff members occasionally passed, Grant now spotted Ethan quietly occupying himself with a handheld game. The boy seemed blissfully unaware of the tension crackling throughout the corridors. A young woman hovered protectively nearby, glancing every so often at the door, as though waiting for Vanessa's return. Grant overheard her talking to another staffer in hushed tones, mentioning how Vanessa rarely let Ethan out of her sight. "She's always checking on him," the young woman whispered. "Ever since some weird sponsor started asking questions, she's been extra cautious." Before Grant could piece together the implications, he noticed a movement in the hallway behind him. Darius stood at a distance, quietly directing two of his cronies to linger near the lounge's door. They peered in at Ethan, exchanging glances that suggested more than a casual interest. Grant's pulse jolted. This was exactly the leverage Darius wanted. The entire situation felt perilous. He slipped behind a potted plant, observing the men as they approached the lounge. One casually pretended to be studying the artwork on the wall, while the other tested the door's handle. Alarm spiked through Grant. He started forward, but he wasn't the only one who had seen them. Leo came from the opposite end of the corridor, intercepting them with swift resolve. "What do you think you're doing?" Leo demanded, stepping between the men and the lounge. The shorter man shook his head, feigning innocence. "Just taking a look around. These auctions can be so interesting." Leo's voice dropped. "You can look around somewhere else. This area's off-limits to attendees." A tense standstill formed, and for a moment, Grant thought a fight would break out. But the two cronies threw each other nervous glances, apparently deciding they didn't want to test Leo's resolve. They muttered something under their breath and backed off, skulking down the corridor. Only when they had turned a corner did Leo move, guiding the staffer inside and shutting the door firmly to protect Ethan. Grant exhaled, relief mixing with outrage. Vanessa and Ethan were clearly in Darius's crosshairs. He couldn't stand by and watch that happen, especially now that he suspected Ethan might be more than just Vanessa's child. Could he really be Grant's as well? A swirl of old regrets and fresh determination surged within him. He had to find a way to protect them both, no matter what it cost. Before he could settle his thoughts, a muffled voice from deeper in the corridor drew his attention. It was Darius, presumably scolding the cronies who had just backed off, warning them not to fail him again. Grant pressed himself against the wall, waiting, his mind racing as he listened to the muffled threats. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. At last, Darius's men moved out of sight. Grant, still hiding, glanced toward the lounge. He could see that Leo was on guard near Ethan, resolute in his task. But for how long could they keep the boy safe from Darius's plots? There was too much confusion and danger swirling. Grant's chest tightened with unresolved questions about Vanessa, guilt about the past, and the urgent realization that any misstep here could lead to real harm. Determined to act, he decided that whatever secrets Vanessa guarded, he had to uncover the truth, not just for his sake, but for the child's safety. He couldn't let Darius corner them into a desperate situation. Taking a breath, He promised himself that he'd speak to Vanessa again no matter how many walls she put up. He needed answers. As he turned, footsteps sounded behind him. More of Darius's men returning to patrol. This time, Leo was there first. With a quick maneuver, he blocked their path and effectively escorted them out of the restricted area. Grant stayed back, watching intense admiration of Leo's dedication. Just then, from the crack of the backstage door, Ethan peeked out, drawn by the commotion. His expression was one of shy curiosity, a small furrow in his brow as he tried to make sense of the scene. That was when everything seemed to go still for Grant. He couldn't look away from the boy's face, the large greenish-brown eyes and the tilt of his mouth. Grant witnesses Leo physically escorting Darius's men away, while Ethan peeks out from behind a curtain. The boy's curious greenish-brown gaze locks with Grant's, striking him with a sudden sense of recognition. Grant lingered, heart pounding, in the dim corridor where Ethan had peeked out just moments ago. The boy's eyes still burned in his mind, so reminiscent of his own that he couldn't ignore the possibilities any longer. Searching for answers, he moved deeper into the backstage area, passing stacks of boxes and folded chairs. Behind him, he heard the muffled buzz of conversation from the main hall as the auction rumbled onward. Ahead, a hush waited, as if the hallway itself braced for the next collision of events. He slipped around a corner, hoping for a quiet spot to collect his thoughts. So much weighed on him. Darius's threats, Vanessa's evasive behavior, and Ethan's presence that tugged at old emotions he'd thought buried for good. He found an alcove near a locked storeroom, out of the direct flow of staff. Leaning against the cold wall, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to calm his racing pulse. Without warning, footsteps echoed. Before Grant could fully regain his composure, two of Darius's henchmen blocked each end of the corridor. They moved in with purposeful strides, forcing him to step back against the storeroom door. One held a sheaf of papers in a tight grip. The other hovered, arms folded across a burly chest. Their expressions carried no warmth. "Mr. Morgan," the first man said, voice low, "we have some documents that require your immediate attention." Grant kept his posture firm. "And if I refuse?" "You won't refuse," the second man muttered. He shoved the papers in Grant's direction. "Sign where indicated. It's a simple arrangement." A single glance told Grant these were forged contracts, clauses referencing foreign bank accounts and suspicious transactions. His jaw clenched. If he put his name there, it would implicate him in money laundering on a massive scale. That was no simple arrangement. It was blackmail, pure and simple. Before he could speak, a familiar voice broke in from behind. "Gentlemen, let's not do this here." Darius strolled into the corridor, hands casually clasped behind his back. He seemed almost proud to see Grant cornered. Grant's stomach tightened as Darius leaned in with a polished smile. "We both know you want to protect certain people from public embarrassment. Sign those papers, and all your concerns will disappear. It's a fair exchange, wouldn't you say?" Grant's words came out through clenched teeth. "That's never going to happen." Darius exhaled a theatrical sigh. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I suggest you think about the consequences. People are so quick to believe the worst. Whether you truly abandoned a child or not, the rumors would destroy your perfect image. Imagine the headlines." Grant swallowed, glancing at the menacing forms of the two henchmen. They stepped closer, crowding his space. Tension crackled in the air. "You have 5 seconds, Darius continued, voice dropping to a sinister edge. "Sign it, or we'll make sure the entire world learns how callous you truly are." Grant felt the papers thrust at his chest again. He slapped them aside, fury snapping in his eyes. "Stay away from them, Vanessa and her son. Whatever you think you'll gain by threatening me, it won't end well." That was the tipping point. The henchman nearest him grabbed the front of Grant's suit jacket, while the other loomed menacingly, fists clenched. Grant prepared to defend himself, But before anyone could land a blow, Leo's clear voice echoed in the corridor. "That's enough." Leo stepped in, broad shoulders squared. In a flash, the man holding Grant released him to confront the new arrival. The corridor burst into a sudden flurry of motion, fists swinging and shoes scuffling against polished floors. One henchman lunged at Leo, only to be met with a swift block. Another clashed with him, sending a dull thud reverberating off the walls. Grant tried to intervene, not wanting the situation to spiral, but he was forced to duck a wild punch from the henchman who'd recovered from Leo's defense. The blow whistled past Grant's ear and struck the storeroom door instead, rattling it violently on its hinges. Grant seized the moment, ramming his shoulder into the henchman's side, causing the man to stumble. Darius stood back, oddly calm, watching the chaos with a slight smirk. He made no move to stop it, clearly enjoying the desperation he'd created. Anger spiked through Grant, but his priority was shutting this down before anyone got seriously hurt. After a few brutal seconds, Leo wrestled one henchman to the ground. Grant pinned the other against the wall. Labored breathing filled the narrow space as staffers in black uniforms rushed over to see what was happening. Among them, Vanessa appeared, eyes wide with alarm. She covered her mouth, her expression torn between shock and fear. As soon as she saw the two men slumped in defeat, she turned her gaze to Grant. Horror and something else flickered across her face. He released the henchman, stepping back to catch his breath. The man coughed, rubbing at his chest, glaring daggers at both Grant and Leo. Darius smoothly adjusted his tie, affecting an air of superiority. The oncoming staffers gasped as they took in the scene, panting bodies, scattered papers, and a storeroom door dented from the impact. Some of them bent to help the henchman up. Others looked to Darius and Grant, seeking explanations. Darius spoke first, his words artfully tailored. "A simple misunderstanding, I'm sure," he declared, sweeping a hand over the disheveled corridor. Vanessa stepped forward, disbelief tinging her voice. "Misunderstanding? It looks more like an assault." Darius lifted both palms. "Now, Vanessa, let's remain professional. Tensions run high at these auctions. Emotions spill over. I'm sure your security man here just got confused." Grant wanted to retort, but the staffers surrounded them, asking if anyone was hurt. He could see how shaken Vanessa was, her shoulders trembling, her posture rigid. She faced him, struggling to hold her composure. "What is really going on, Grant?" she asked, voice tight. Before he could respond, Leo muttered, "Darius threatened Mr. Morgan, tried to force him to sign something. It got out of hand." Vanessa looked from Leo to Grant, then to Darius. Her composure cracked momentarily, revealing raw concern behind her eyes. "Is this true?" she demanded of Darius. He only gave a cool laugh, collecting the scattered papers. "These are business proposals. Mr. Morgan overreacted." A tense silence fell. Two uniformed security guards arrived and the onlookers parted. One guard gently asked Vanessa if she wanted them to remove Darius from the premises, but her expression went blank, as though she knew she couldn't simply eject a key sponsor without consequences. Grant, noticing the flicker of panic in her eyes, spoke up. "I'm fine. Let's just call it a night on this." He didn't want to stir a scene that would rip apart Vanessa's carefully orchestrated event. Darius, with a final satisfied smirk, tucked the papers under his arm. "I'll leave you all to your festivities," he said. "We can discuss everything later, Mr. Morgan." He swept from the corridor, followed by his bruised henchmen. A few staffers hurried after them to assess any damages. The rest hung back, whispering. News of this scuffle would no doubt spread like wildfire, fueling rumors and gossip across the entire auction. Vanessa exhaled in shuddering relief, turning to Grant and Leo. "I'm sorry," she managed, forcing steadiness back into her voice. "This is my fault for not tightening security on who gets access." Grant offered a faint shake of his head, trying to reassure her. "It's not your fault. Darius was looking for a fight." She pressed her lips together, her gaze flicking to the corridor where Ethan was presumably waiting, oblivious. That protective concern flared again, and Grant recognized it instantly. She was afraid for her child. Though he still didn't know the full truth, he sensed how fiercely she wanted to keep Ethan safe from Darius's schemes. Security guards asked a few questions and then directed everyone to disperse. The hum of the venue's overhead speakers signaled the next stage of the auction about to begin. Out in the main hall, the upper crust of bidders remained unaware of the drama unfolding backstage, or if they knew, they were playing ignorant. As the cluster of staff drifted away, Winston appeared at the corridor's entrance, giving Grant a concerned look. Satisfied that everything had calmed, Winston went to update the organizers, leaving Grant and Leo a moment of quiet in the aftermath. Grant turned to him. "Thanks. You saved me back there." Leo brushed off his sleeve. "I'm just doing my job. Vanessa's orders." He paused before adding, "She never invited Darius. He forced his way in through the sponsors, gave her a sizable check last minute, so the board approved him without her consent." That confirmed what Grant already suspected. Darius had orchestrated this entire night to manipulate Vanessa, and, by extension, him. Tension still gnawed at Grant, yet he took comfort in knowing he and Leo were on the same side, at least for now. The corridor fell silent again as they parted ways. Grant's shoulder throbbed from where he'd slammed into one of the henchmen, and his head swam with too many questions. He wanted to find Vanessa, demand clarity, see if she and Ethan were truly safe. But something told him she'd retreat to her responsibilities, refusing to open up easily. A few minutes later, Grant found himself in another quiet stretch of hallway, far from the main bustle. He pressed one hand against the wall and tried to steady his breathing, reflecting on how quickly everything had escalated. Darius's web of threats, the scuffle, Vanessa's alarmed expression, none of it boded well. That was when he heard a soft footstep behind him. His heart quickened. He turned halfway, only to see the corridor empty. Then her voice reached him, low and urgent. "Grant, we need to talk." Startled, he spun fully around. Vanessa stood there with her posture tense, eyes gleaming with old hurt and urgent need. Grant stared at Vanessa in the dim light of the corridor, his chest still tight from the recent clash with Darius's henchman. Her posture was rigid, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. It was impossible to miss the flicker of pain in her gaze. She seemed torn between wanting to speak and staying silent. "I didn't expect to see you again," she began, her voice low. "Not like this." He swallowed the past that threatened to rise like a tidal wave. "I've been trying to find you," he said, attempting to keep his tone gentle. "But every time I get close, you vanish." A bitter half-laugh escaped her. "Because I'm busy running this event and stopping it from collapsing, especially with Darius pulling strings. You sure you want to corner me with questions right now?" He exhaled, glancing around the empty corridor, then looked at her with unmistakable urgency. "I need to know what's going on. You disappeared years ago, then here you are, organizing a high-stakes auction while that man breathes down your neck. Tell me the truth, Vanessa." She folded her arms, clearly defensive. "Why would you care about my truth now? You left, Grant. Whatever you remember about us is old history, and it's best left there." He winced, hearing the anger etched under her words. "I didn't leave by choice. I tried to contact you after my overseas expansion took off, but everything got lost." It felt inadequate even as he said it. He'd made mistakes, and he knew it. She studied him for a moment. "The only thing that matters tonight is making sure this event doesn't fall into disaster and keeping certain people out of Darius's crosshairs. That includes me, the staff, the sponsors we rely on. I can handle it." Grant drew closer, lowering his voice. "Are you sure you can handle it alone? Look at what nearly happened. He's pushing you from every angle." Her eyes dropped briefly, sadness flashing there. "I appreciate the concern, but this is my mess to fix. Darius has influential friends. Kicking him out isn't an option, or the entire auction loses funding. Do you realize how many charities depend on the money raised tonight? The board will never forgive me if I sabotage that." Grant could see the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. He also sensed she was keeping something vital hidden, something bigger than just the success of the auction. "Then let me help," he offered. "Darius is threatening me too, claiming he knows personal details. We're in the same fight whether you like it or not." She shook her head. "No, you're not in the same fight. This is my life, my job, and—" She caught herself, nearly letting a thought slip. A flicker of panic crossed her face and she turned away, lips pressed tight. Grant's mind raced, thinking of the boy he'd seen and the look in his eyes. "Vanessa," he said softly, "why won't you tell me about the child?" That made her spine go rigid. Without turning, she spoke in a voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Stay out of it, Grant." "Is he your son?" he pressed gently. Her shoulders tensed. "My personal life is none of your concern, not anymore." There was steel in her tone, and it forced him to step back. He remembered how proud she'd always been, how fiercely she'd protected whatever she cherished. He suspected the wall she built around this secret was even taller. Meanwhile, an inner voice warned him that she might see his questions as meddling. He swallowed the urge to press further and forced himself to shift tactics. "All right," he said at last, though his voice shook slightly. "If you won't tell me, at least let me stand by you. Let's keep Darius from tearing everything down." She half turned, her profile etched in the corridor's low light. "Why would you do that?" He hesitated. "Because once, you mattered to me. A lot. And I can't just watch you struggle." Emotions flickered across her face, but she buried them quickly. "Just stay focused on your own problems. That might be safer for both of us." With that, she squared her shoulders and walked away, her heels echoing down the hallway until she vanished from sight. Grant let out a long breath, running a hand over his face. Questions buzzed in his head, about the little boy, about what exactly happened after he'd lost contact with Vanessa, and why she acted as if his mere presence was a fresh wound. But pressing too hard risked driving her deeper into isolation. He made his way back into the main hall to find the auction in full swing. A dramatic glass sculpture now occupied center stage, swirling under the spotlights. Bidders raised their paddles, the numbers climbing higher with each call. He slipped into a seat near Winston, who gave him a sharp look. "Where have you been?" Winston asked, voice subdued under the booming of the auctioneer's gavel. Grant responded quietly. "Backstage. Everything's complicated." Winston nodded, apparently reading the tension in his friend's face. "Any progress with Vanessa?" Grant offered a tight shrug. "She's shut me out. But I think Darius is blackmailing her just like he's trying to do with me. We can't let him succeed." The next item was brought out, a lavish antique painting framed in gold filigree. The auctioneer began with a lofty starting price, prompting a few gasps from the audience. Across the room, Darius stood by a marble pillar, calmly sipping champagne. His gaze flicked to Grant with a mocking tilt of his head. It was a silent reminder of his power, as if he knew exactly how unsettled Grant felt. Grant forced himself to focus on the stage. He was here, after all, to purchase a renowned piece from the Siena collection for a crucial partnership deal. He couldn't let Darius's intimidation derail his business responsibilities. So, when the painting's final bid soared, Grant kept his paddle down, uninterested. He needed to conserve resources for the Siena piece that would appear near the end of the auction. Amid the tense hush, a staffer approached the microphone to announce a short break before the final round of sales. The assembled guests rose, milling about for refreshments and whispered conversations. The hush that had dominated the earlier part of the evening turned into anxious murmurs. The scuffle with Darius's men must have spread through rumor, because an undercurrent of speculation now rippled through the crowd. Grant wove through clusters of guests in the foyer, shaking hands with a few acquaintances who asked polite, pointed questions about the incident. He offered bland reassurances that nothing was amiss. Occasionally, he glimpsed Vanessa near the stage, conferring with her assistants, always stepping out of sight before he could catch her eye. He couldn't decide whether she was intentionally evading him or simply swamped by duties. He found a less crowded area where he could breathe for a moment. That was when Darius's smooth voice startled him from behind. "Still here, I see. Determined to walk away with something valuable tonight?" Grant turned, forcing his expression to remain neutral. "Yes, I plan to bid on the Sienna collection piece. I won't let you scare me off." Darius feigned surprise. "Scare you off? Now why would I do that? We can both have what we want, assuming you're willing to make reasonable compromises." Grant's jaw tightened. "I don't make shady deals." A shadow of irritation crossed Darius's face, but it melted into that usual smug half-smile. "Let's see how confident you are after this final round." With those cryptic words, he strolled away, leaving Grant seething. Time crawled forward. The auction reconvened, seats were taken, and the lights dimmed in preparation for the showcase of the grand finale items. The tension pulsed in the air like a drumbeat. In the row ahead, Winston caught Grant's eye, giving a faint nod of encouragement. The bidding on a pair of ornate vases concluded with polite applause. Finally, the moment arrived for the unveiling of the star piece, a richly colored canvas from the Sienna collection that Grant had come to secure. The auctioneer, voice charged with ceremony, invited the crowd's attention as staff brought the painting forward. A hush befell the room, and Grant felt his nerves bristle. He needed this victory, if only to maintain some semblance of normalcy in his public persona. But as he reached for his bitter paddle, something buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated, frowning, and slipped out his phone. The number on the screen was unknown. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. A swirl of dread prickled over his skin. He glanced around the room, searching for any sign of who might be contacting him at such a critical moment, but no one seemed to notice him. The gavel struck once. Somebody opened the bidding on the painting. Ignoring the bid, Grant tapped the message open. A single line glowed back at him. "Ask her about the boy, or I will." Grant stared at his phone in disbelief, the terse message making his stomach drop. "Ask her about the boy, or I will." Cold apprehension prickled through him. The timing was unmistakable. The final bidding for the Sienna collection painting was in full swing around him, but the words on that screen had just shattered his concentration. He glanced up to see the auctioneer calling out numbers in an animated voice, raising the price of the painting to dizzying heights. Attendees vied for the exclusive piece, paddles flying, yet Grant barely heard a word. His mind churned. Who wrote that message, and how did they know to send it right now? He had plenty of enemies, but none so fixated as Darius, the man who seemed determined to torment him all night. Slowly, Grant set the phone aside. He had prepared for this auction for weeks, but the painting no longer seemed important. Darius wanted to leverage something that cut even deeper, Vanessa and that boy. Summoning his resolve, Grant rose, leaving the heated bidding behind. Winston gave him a questioning look from a few rows ahead, but Grant signaled that he needed to step out. He slipped into the hallway as the echo of the auctioneer's gavel faded behind him. Broad windows offered a view of the snowy grounds outside, and the reflection of his troubled expression stared back at him. A wave of old memories swamped him. His short but intense relationship with Vanessa, their dreams of a future, the way it had all collapsed when his overseas expansion took him away. All that time he had thought the heartbreak was mutual but final. Now, there was a child in the picture, one who bore a striking resemblance to him. Could it really be possible that Ethan was his son? His phone chimed again, drawing him out of his thoughts. Another anonymous message. "Last chance. I won't wait much longer." A low curse escaped his lips. This had to be Darius, or someone working for him, exploiting the greatest vulnerability Grant never knew he had. He had to confront Vanessa. if only to protect her and the boy from any further threat. Anger flared, fueling his determination. Enough of these cryptic texts and half-truths. He deserved to know the truth, and he needed it before Darius could cause serious damage. He found Vanessa near the backstage area, speaking in hushed tones with a staff member who was pointing anxiously at a schedule of the night's events. She tried to soothe the staffer's concerns, but Grant could see the lines of stress etched on her face. As soon as the staff member darted away, Grant stepped up to her. "Vanessa," he said. His voice shook with urgency. "We have to talk right now." She stiffened. "Grant, I'm in the middle of coordinating the final portion of the auction. Can it wait?" He shook his head. "No. Darius is ramping up whatever he has planned. I just got a text threatening to expose secrets about a boy. Your boy. And I have reason to think, Vanessa, I have to know." His voice faltered, the weight of his suspicions making it hard to speak. "Is Ethan my son?" Her face drained of color, a flash of panic darting through her eyes. For a long moment she stood there, stunned into silence. Then she glanced around, checking if anyone was within earshot. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him into a quieter side corridor. The space was cramped, lined with racks of stage costumes. She turned on him, voice low. "Who messaged you?" she demanded. "And what exactly did they say?" He showed her his phone. She scanned the texts quickly, her lips pressing into a grim line. "I knew Darius had been digging into my personal records, but I never thought he'd stoop to this so quickly." Grant kept his gaze locked on her. "It's a simple question, Vanessa. Ethan—" The name felt heavy on his tongue. "Is he mine?" She covered her mouth for a second, breathing unsteadily. "I can't believe he's forcing this moment," she muttered, meaning Darius. Finally, she dropped her hand. "Grant, I never wanted you to find out like this." A pulse of both hope and fear surged inside him. "So you're saying he's your son," she whispered. The admission seemed to drain the remaining strength from her. She leaned back against the wall, looking more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "I was going to tell you, but you left so suddenly years ago, and then every time I tried to contact you, your company had you overseas. I was angry, hurt, and when I finally realized I was pregnant, you were practically unreachable." His chest tightened, a knot of guilt and disbelief forming inside him. "I never received any message from you. Not one letter, I swear." She lowered her eyes. "I know that now. But back then I had to do what was best for my child, so I decided to raise him alone." Grant pressed a hand over his face, struggling to absorb the truth. This entire night, he'd fought to keep his composure in the face of Darius's threats, and now the world felt like it had shifted beneath his feet. He had a son, a 4-year-old boy he'd never known existed. "Vanessa, how could this happen? Why didn't someone—" Her eyes gleamed with fresh hurt. "I told you. I tried. But you were gone, always traveling, always building your empire. After a while, I stopped trying because I was sick of being disappointed. I came to terms with doing it alone, and then you show up tonight, and Darius uses Ethan like a bargaining chip." A tremor broke her voice. "I wish you hadn't found out this way." Grant's heart twisted. He stepped closer, unsure whether she'd let him comfort her. He still saw the lingering hurt in her face, and part of him raged at himself for failing her all those years ago. "Vanessa, please believe me when I say I never would have abandoned you if I'd known. I'm furious that Darius is weaponizing something so personal." His hand found hers tentatively. "And I want to make things right somehow." She didn't pull away, but there was a guarded edge in her posture. "The problem is bigger than our past now. Darius plans to humiliate you, ruin your public image, and he won't hesitate to drag me and Ethan through the mud in the process." Grant's eyes hardened. "I won't let that happen." From somewhere beyond the corridor came the muffled hum of voices. The auction was still proceeding. Time was running, and the threat was very real. He squeezed Vanessa's hand gently. "We stand together, and we fight him. All of us. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Ethan." Her lips quivered, but a faint spark of relief touched her eyes. "He's my whole world, Grant. I can't let that monster near him." "Then we won't," Grant vowed. "We'll figure out a way." She nodded, drawing in a shuddering breath. Before either could say more, the echo of footsteps rippled along the corridor. They both fell silent, startled. As though on instinct, Vanessa stepped away from him, glancing down the hall. A shadow moved, and a tall figure emerged, Darius. He lingered just out of direct sight, but close enough for his presence to be felt. He gave them a slow, mocking clap, each echo sounding like a thunderclap in the hush. "Well, well," he said, his tone steeped in satisfaction. "What a touching reunion." Grant's anger flared. "You've overheard enough, Darius. Get out." Darius's smug smile only widened. "Oh, I heard everything, Morgan, including that lovely confirmation about your son." He tilted his head as though savoring the victory. "It'll make for splendid headlines, don't you think? Or perhaps a more private negotiation would suit your tastes." Vanessa stiffened, stepping in front of Grant. "Leave Ethan out of this," she demanded, voice trembling. "He's just a child." "Then I suggest you cooperate," Darius replied with a tone of dark satisfaction. "Because now I have an even stronger card to play. And if I were you, I'd sign whatever I put in front of you." Grant felt a pulse pounding in his temples. He forced himself to keep calm, for Vanessa's sake, for Ethan's. Darius gave a gracious half-bow and retreated, disappearing down the corridor as swiftly as he'd appeared, but leaving the echo of his smirk behind. In the silence that followed, Grant reached for Vanessa's hand again. She let him take it this time, leaning her forehead briefly against his shoulder in exhaustion and fear. They shared a moment of unspoken resolve. Now that the truth was out, there was no going back to half measures. They had to confront Darius's blackmail and safeguard Ethan, no matter the cost. From around the corner, a staff member called out for Vanessa, urgently requesting her presence on stage to address the next portion of the auction. She pulled away, nodding at Grant to indicate she would be all right for the moment. He inhaled a steadying breath, anger and protectiveness swirling within him. They both knew the confrontation was only beginning. The information left Grant shocked and undone, while from down the corridor Darius heard every word, confirming his trump card for blackmail. Grant took a moment to steady himself in a deserted side corridor, trying to calm the pounding in his chest. The realization that Ethan was his son still reverberated through every corner of his mind. Despite the swirl of questions and guilt, he pushed them aside, forcing himself to confront the situation at hand. Darius was no longer just an unscrupulous business rival. He was a threat to Grant's family, and he held blackmail material that could explode into scandal at any moment. Stepping into the brightly lit foyer, Grant was met by a frenetic hum of conversation. The auction was nearing its final segment, and influential guests mingled in tight clusters, exchanging last-minute deals and gossip. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation and tension. He saw a few reporters lurking near the walls, discreetly snapping photos or eavesdropping on conversations. It was as if they scented blood in the water. Winston approached him, face lined with worry. "You look like you've been through a grinder," he said quietly. "The last hour's been a whirlwind. What's going on?" Grant managed a quick, faint smile. "Too much to explain here. Let's just say Darius isn't done making trouble." Winston nodded grimly. "Word around the room is that Darius is planning a big power play. A few sponsors are whispering about improprieties with the event's finances. Something about hush-hush deals behind the scenes." Grant's stomach twisted. Exactly the kind of rumor Darius would start to amplify the chaos. "I'll handle it," Grant said. "For now, keep an eye out. If you see him cornering Vanessa or her staff, Text me." "Got it," Winston agreed, slipping back into the crowd. Grant inhaled deeply, forcing himself to look composed. The last thing he needed was for the paparazzi or other investors to spot him looking rattled. He had to maintain the facade of a confident CEO, here to secure an art deal. Let Darius think he was calm and unbothered. Meanwhile, he was already plotting how to counter any public attack. He spied Vanessa crossing the foyer, directing a couple of anxious staff members who clutched clipboards. She wore a poised face for their benefit, but Grant recognized the strain in her eyes. That was the woman who had carried their son alone. The woman who, despite everything, had shouldered the weight of an entire event riddled with hidden threats. He moved closer, catching her gaze. She paused her conversation, and the staffers took the opportunity to dash off. In the momentary lull, Grant said, "Are you holding up?" She nodded stiffly, lips pressed. "We have only a few items left in the auction. We're almost at the finish line, if we can get there without Darius blowing it all up." They both knew finishing the auction was only part of the issue. Once the gavel fell on the last piece, there was no guarantee Darius wouldn't unleash his blackmail. Vanessa lowered her voice. "I asked one of the board members if we could return Darius's sponsorship check, but they said it's too late. The event's finances are already tied up. If we do that, we'll risk a massive gap in the budget, not to mention the media storm." Grant's jaw set. "So we're stuck letting him stay, or else this entire thing collapses. Perfect. Meanwhile, he's threatening to expose my connection to Ethan. It's humiliating for you, too, like you've hidden something scandalous." Her eyes flicked around to ensure no one overheard. "I can handle rumors about me. I just don't want Ethan hurt. He's too young to understand why the press would swarm him." Grant placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll keep him safe, Vanessa. I promise." Before she could respond, a voice crackled over the venue's speaker system, urging guests to take their seats in the main hall for the final stretch of bidding. The atmosphere tightened. Everyone began to file back inside with measured excitement, unaware that a private drama loomed over the evening's final moments. Grant and Vanessa exchanged a look, solidarity mixed with anxiety, then parted ways. She joined the event staff by the stage, preparing to oversee the auction's conclusion, while Grant slipped into a seat near the center aisle. Reporters now seemed more numerous, lurking at the fringes with cameras, hoping to catch any hint of scandal. Grant wondered if Darius had tipped them off that something big was about to break. A hush spread through the hall as the lights dimmed. The auctioneer, showing no sign of the turmoil backstage, addressed the crowd with practiced enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have arrived at the final items of the night, each a masterpiece in its own right. Bid generously, and let's end this evening with a flourish." A round of applause followed, though it sounded taut. Grant tensed when he saw Darius take a seat across the aisle, crossing one leg over the other with casual arrogance. Their eyes locked. Darius offered a thin, knowing smile, like a wolf waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. One by one, the final pieces were presented. Prices soared, culminating in gasps and awed murmurs each time the gavel came down. A sleek, abstract sculpture, a gilded antique mirror, a pair of intricately carved figurines. Each went for sums that could buy a family home outright. Yet Grant's nerves hummed not for the art, but for the countdown happening in the shadows. With each successful sale, the event inched closer to its conclusion, and closer to the hour of Darius's ultimatum. During one tense break between items, Grant checked his phone, half expecting another scathing text. Nothing. The silence was unsettling. He glanced toward Vanessa, who stood by the stage wings, posture alert. She caught his eye once, giving a faint nod. He tried to communicate reassurance through his expression, but fear chewed at him. Darius was too quiet. It felt like the calm before a storm. Another piece came and went, a vintage tapestry, sold in less than 5 minutes. The crowd applauded politely, some even rising for a stretch as staff swapped out items. Suddenly, Darius stood, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. He walked to the front row, speaking in hushed tones with two potential buyers. The men nodded, scribbling on notepads and glancing at their phones. Grant guessed they might be finalizing some last-minute business. Or perhaps Darius was spinning them a yarn about a future he could secure if they sided with him. Either way, Grant kept a close watch. The auctioneer cleared his throat for the final item of the night, a centuries-old painting rumored to have belonged to an obscure royal lineage. Gasps of anticipation rippled across the audience. A hush descended, so complete one could hear the faint rustle of the velvet curtain as staff unveiled the canvas. The painting shimmered under the spotlight, and the opening bid soared high from the get-go. As the flurry of bidding commenced, Darius took his seat again, flipping his phone in one hand like a toy. Occasionally he glanced over at Grant. The message was clear. Your time is almost up. Grant weighed his options, mind racing. If he defied Darius's blackmail demands, there was no doubt Darius would release the story of Ethan to the press, spinning it so that Grant appeared to have knowingly abandoned mother and child. The scandal would be devastating for Grant's reputation, and worse, for the gentle boy who had no clue of the turmoil swirling around him. Then again, caving to Darius would mean signing on to illegal activities, forging a deeper connection with a man capable of any betrayal. That path would ruin everything Grant believed in. He thought of Ethan's curious eyes, the way the boy had peeked out from behind that curtain. A quiet determination blossomed in Grant's chest. He would not bend to blackmail, no matter the cost. At the front of the room, the auctioneer banged the gavel on a staggering final number for the painting. Applause erupted, relieved laughter filling the hall. The auction's main event was done. People rose, shaking hands and exchanging business cards, while staff hurried to confirm payments and arrangements for art deliveries. A sense of triumph and camaraderie took hold among the attendees, at least for those unaware of the dark underpinnings. Grant stood as well, scanning the room for Vanessa. He spotted her crossing the stage, offering polite thanks to the staff with a forced smile. She was making her way toward him when Darius stepped into their path. Without a word, he handed Vanessa a sealed envelope, then inclined his head at Grant as if challenging him to intervene. Vanessa gripped the envelope, reading the glint in Darius's eyes. She hesitated, her shoulders tense, clearly afraid to open it in public. Satisfied with her discomfort, Darius turned to Grant. I believe we have unfinished business. Perhaps we should find a more private space to finalize everything? Grant's fists clenched, but he forced himself to speak calmly. I'm not finalizing anything with you except your downfall. Darius's smirk widened. Bravado, I like that. We'll see if you can maintain it once everyone discovers your little secret. Vanessa shot Grant a desperate look. Before he could reply, half a dozen photographers and reporters burst into the space, cameras raised, questions tossed rapid fire. Word had evidently spread that the final sale was concluded, and they were eager to capture quotes and stories from the biggest names in the room. Darius seized the opportunity, stepping forward to greet them with a polished facade, like a man about to deliver a press statement. Flashes blinded Grant, who shielded his eyes. He caught the panicked expression on Vanessa's face. She mouthed something to him he couldn't fully interpret, but he guessed it was along the lines of, "Stop him." Darius cleared his throat before the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I have an important announcement regarding tonight's event. Grant froze. Was this it? Was Darius about to reveal everything, painting Grant as a deadbeat father who'd come crawling back? He edged forward, ready to cut him off, but the crowd of photographers blocked his path. In the sudden chaos, Darius raised a hand, commanding everyone's attention. Then, in an anticlimactic moment, he simply thanked the event staff and the sponsors, praising the night as a smashing success. The reporters poised for follow-up questions, but he grinned, saying, "All in due time. Let's not overshadow the generosity that happened here." It was as if he were toying with Grant, dangling the threat without delivering the final blow. Vanessa slipped around the edges of the press cluster to join Grant, envelope still clutched in her hand. She looked pale. "I'm scared of what's inside," she whispered. "Wait until we're away from prying eyes," Grant whispered back, guiding her gently behind a large display near the hall's exit. The cameras kept snapping, but no one seemed to notice them withdraw. Across the room, Darius made pointed eye contact with Grant, lifting his phone as if to show he held the ultimate control. It was a silent promise. "I can end you any time." Grant moved in front of Vanessa protectively. "Let's get out of here," he urged. "We'll regroup, figure out our next step. Darius won't stop unless we force his hand." She swallowed hard and nodded, letting him usher her toward an exit that led into a quieter corridor. Security staff, busy with final checks and guest departures, barely gave them a glance. They were too accustomed to seeing well-dressed people come and go. Outside the corridor's tall windows, swirling flakes of snow reflected in the floodlights, giving the night a strange, serene beauty that belied the turmoil inside. Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket, and the noise felt like a gunshot in the silence. He pulled it out, dread crawling along his spine. The text was from a hidden number, the screen showing only a single sentence. "Time's up. I'm going public." Grant stared at the text message on his phone. "Time's up. I'm going public." Those words glared at him like a neon warning sign in a silent alley. He stood in a side corridor outside the main hall, Vanessa by his side, each breath they drew tense with the weight of what Darius might do next. Through the doorway, they heard the lilting hum of post-auction chatter. Glasses clinked, and guests laughed in that high society manner that suggested everything was polished, pristine, and perfectly under control. Only Grant and Vanessa knew how fragile that illusion was. "What do we do?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with barely concealed fear. She held an envelope in her hand, the one Darius had thrust at her earlier. She'd refused to open it yet, afraid of the demands or humiliations inside. Grant glanced from her to the phone, jaw tight. "Darius wants me to cave before he drops his revelation about Ethan. He's practically salivating at the chance to turn this event into a scandal." He shoved the phone into his pocket, struggling to steady his voice. "But I won't give in." Vanessa drew in a slow breath, looking past him into the glow of the main hall. "He might do it right in front of everyone. You saw how he flirted with the press earlier, showing off, building to some dramatic announcement." Grant could only nod grimly. His phone buzzed again, but this time he ignored it. Stepping forward, he peered around the corner into the hall. Dozens of elegantly dressed attendees formed small clusters of conversation, sipping champagne and congratulating each other on final bids. The bright chandeliers sparkled, and the air seemed to vibrate with an odd mixture of celebration and mounting tension. At the front of the vast room, the auction stage remained lit, though no new items were on display. The curtains behind that stage rustled occasionally as staff bustled to break down equipment. Security guards stood at the edges, discreet but alert. Winston and Leo were among them, scanning the crowd intently. Grant spotted Winston holding his phone up to his ear, quietly speaking. Perhaps Winston was coordinating with staff to prevent any last-minute chaos. And Leo, crossing his arms over his chest near the center aisle, looked ready to step in if anything flared up. Darius was nowhere in sight. For a second, Grant felt a spike of hope that maybe Darius had slithered away to handle his threats in private. Then a pair of wide double doors on the left swung open, revealing a figure in a sharp suit. A hush rippled outward. Darius stepped into the room, exuding an aura of smug command. Behind him, a few associates trailed, equally sharp-suited and equally menacing in their silence. In the hush, Grant could hear the faint clicks of multiple cameras. Some reporters had hung back after the auction's end, possibly tipped off that something big was about to happen. Vanessa's grip tightened on Grant's arm. "He's going to do it," she murmured shakily. "He's going to drag you, and us, into the spotlight." Grant set his jaw. He won't get the last word. They left the relative safety of the corridor, moving together into the hall. All around them, the clusters of guests sensed the shift. Conversations dwindled into whispers. Gazes flitted between Darius, Grant, and Vanessa, as though everyone had been waiting for this confrontation. Darius surveyed the scene, then smiled thinly. "Friends," he said, projecting his voice as though ready to deliver a keynote address. "If I may have your attention for just a moment, I promise this will be worth your time." His tone was both gracious and razor-sharp, slicing through the atmosphere with lethal poise. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people cast uncertain looks at Grant, recognizing him as the renowned CEO who'd been front and center during the bidding. Others began jockeying for a better view, journalists included. Leo made a subtle move toward the stage, presumably to position himself in case things went south. Winston edged closer, trying to appear casual yet prepared. Grant took a step forward, determined not to cower. If Darius was going to fling accusations, let it be face to face. Vanessa, however, held back, fear and dignity warring across her features. Grant tried to give her a reassuring glance. He wished they had more time to plan, but Darius had forced everyone's hand. Darius, looming near the stage, lifted a microphone from the auctioneer's stand. "I want to congratulate our amazing hosts on a successful evening," he began, voice echoing in the hushed space. "Record-breaking bids, exquisite works of art, and all for very worthy causes. Truly, a night to remember." He paused, scanning the audience with predatory satisfaction. "But there's something else I think we should address before we all go home." He turned his gaze onto Grant. The tension in the room soared, and a hush so profound settled that even the clink of glass against marble floors sounded thunderous. Grant stepped forward. "If you have something to say, Darius, say it." A sly grin curved across Darius's lips. He regarded Grant with a mix of amusement and contempt. "Indeed I do. It concerns a secret that one of our esteemed guests has been hiding, a secret that, in my opinion, goes right to the heart of integrity and honesty." His tone dripped with false sympathy. "And it may well affect the reputations of several people here tonight." The reporters stirred, eyes lighting up. Cameras were aimed, microphones lifted. Darius had them right where he wanted them, on the cusp of sensational news. Grant's pulse hammered, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Stop dragging out the suspense. If you have an accusation, come out with it." Darius took a dramatic breath, glancing at the audience as if to build anticipation. "It seems we have a certain prominent figure who's been less than honest about his personal life. A figure who prides himself on philanthropy and moral leadership. But behind closed doors?" He gave a theatrical shrug. "Well, let's just say he has a child he conveniently never acknowledged. A beautiful boy whose mother struggled on her own, while he played the jet-setting millionaire." A collective gasp rippled. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts, capturing the tension on every face. Some of the guests looked shocked, others intrigued. Murmured speculation rose, swirling through the crowd. Vanessa, off to the side, flinched as though physically struck. Grant felt his cheeks burn with anger, but he refused to show any outward panic. "That's quite a story," he said, pitching his voice to Carrie, "but you haven't offered a single piece of real evidence." Darius cocked his head, eyes gleaming triumphantly. "Evidence, you say? I happen to have quite a bit. Photos, documents, and statements, enough to make for an explosive reveal in tomorrow's papers. Unless, of course, we can resolve this matter privately." He folded his arms, as if challenging Grant to protest. "For the sake of the child, you understand." Grant suppressed the urge to lunge forward. This was classic blackmail, performed center stage. "You're trying to use a young boy as leverage for your twisted schemes," he said, voice hoarse with anger. "That's low, even for you." Darius gave a polished shrug. "Let's not resort to insults. I'm simply pointing out that certain moral obligations exist. Perhaps if you'd like to spare the boy and his mother from public shame, you'll reconsider our earlier discussions." The crowd, riveted by this unexpected drama, shifted restlessly. The hush became a swirl of hushed commentary. Leo and Winston exchanged worried looks, slipping around the perimeter, probably searching for a way to disrupt the fiasco. But how could they? Darius had carefully chosen this spotlight moment to trap Grant. Then Grant surprised everyone, maybe even himself, by stepping directly onto the stage with measured calm. The overhead lights bore down on him, making it impossible to hide any flicker in his expression. He took the microphone from Darius's hand in one decisive motion. "Let's be clear," Grant said, voice projecting so it reached the watchers gathered near the front. "You have no real concern for my child. You're threatening to reveal personal information because you want to blackmail me into signing illegal agreements. All of this is about your greed." That lit a firestorm of murmurs. Reporters scrambled to record every word. In the corner of his eye, Grant saw Vanessa, tears glimmering. She stood with her hands clasped, face pale. He shot her a quick nod of assurance before focusing back on Darius, who stared at him with hard-eyed fury. "Still playing the hero?" Darius asked, regaining control of another mic from the stand. "You can't bluff your way out of this. Everyone here can see you're hiding the truth about that child. Shall I bring out the documents? Photographs of the boy who looks so much like you?" Grant's fist clenched at his side, but he didn't back down. "Go ahead," he said, voice ringing. "Bring them all out. I have nothing to hide about my son. What I do have a problem with is your attempt to manipulate me and endanger a family for personal gain." The crowd stilled, waiting to see how Darius would respond. For a moment, the man faltered, eyes narrowing in confusion at Grant's bold stance. He hadn't expected Grant to stand firm, unafraid of the impending scandal. The tension reached a suffocating high. If Darius produced those damning photos, the media frenzy would be unstoppable. But any illusions that Grant was merely a coward forced into compliance were now shattered. A cold smile curled Darius's lips. "We'll see how fearless you are, Morgan, once the press digs into every missed birthday, every unmailed check. You abandoned him for 4 years. Do you truly think you'll walk away unscathed?" It took all of Grant's self-control not to lash out physically. "I'll face my mistakes," he said, "but I won't be bullied into criminal deals. I don't care what threat you hold over me." A wave of chatter rose among the watching guests, some outraged at Darius's tactic, others confused, trying to piece together the real story. Flashbulbs from the photographers flared like tiny lightning strikes, capturing each second of the confrontation. Vanessa, gathering her courage, stepped forward. "Darius, you're the only disgrace here. Exploiting an innocent boy? Is that how you do business?" Darius turned on her, brandishing his phone. "You and Morgan can pretend to be noble parents all you like. Once this is out, both your reputations will be in tatters." An uneasy hush fell again, as though the entire hall balanced on the edge of a knife. Through the tension, Grant saw a flicker of movement. Winston and Leo, in the back, gesturing for him to hold on. They seemed to be preparing something, a plan, a reveal. Grant wasn't sure, but he trusted them. "I won't let you drag this on any longer," Darius snapped, turning back to the crowd. "I have proof on hand that—" "Enough!" Grant's voice boomed, and the hall held its breath. "This isn't about proof or revelations. It's about a blackmailer using private information to force illegal business deals. If you release that information, go ahead, but know that it only proves your own corruption." A beat of thick silence followed. Then the crowd erupted with anxious whispers. Cameras flashed again, capturing Grant's every determined angle. Darius's face darkened as he realized that his dramatic unveiling wasn't triggering the fear he expected. Instead, the revelation might well confirm his own wrongdoing in the public eye. Grant could almost taste Darius's fury, coiled like a snake about to strike. Cameras turned on Darius too, recording his reaction. The man took a step back, momentarily at a loss. Then, with an enraged scowl, he abandoned the microphone stand. He stalked off the stage, pushing through the throng. Reporters parted for him, startled. A hush of confusion and suspense lingered in the wake of his abrupt exit. Grant stood there, chest heaving, scanning the room. Vanessa joined him, her expression a mix of astonishment and relief. Leo and Winston exchanged tense nods as if to say, "We're not done yet." From a far corner of the gallery, someone spotted Darius again. He had paused near a tall pillar, face twisted with anger as he yanked open his briefcase. A thick folder emerged, documents threatening to spill over. His glare found Grant, brimming with hatred and frustration. The air felt charged, as though the storm was only gathering strength. Darius, enraged, grips a hidden folder of documents. He glares at Grant from across the gallery, signaling that a direct confrontation, perhaps a final one, is coming. The hush that followed Darius's abrupt exit from the stage did not last long. Whispers ignited across the auction hall, pulling bystanders into a current of speculation as powerful as an undertow. Even though the final gavel had fallen some minutes before, few seemed eager to leave. In fact, the tension in the room was growing by the second. People wanted a spectacle, and Darius was poised to deliver it. Grant drew a shaky breath and scanned the space. Leo maneuvered near the edges, ready for another violent turn. Winston hovered closer to the stage, phone in hand, discreetly recording the unfolding drama in case it became evidence. Vanessa stood beside Grant, her entire posture rigid, one hand fluttering near her throat as though struggling to hold in a silent scream. They both searched for Ethan, who was presumably in a secure corner backstage. That thought brought Grant a sliver of reassurance. At least the boy was safe for now. Darius remained by the towering marble pillar he'd stormed toward, flipping open a thick folder stuffed with documents. His expression was all venom. Onlookers, uncertain whether to retreat or watch, formed a wide semicircle around him. Some pulled out phones, filming in shaky frames. Others simply stared with parted lips, drawn to the sense that everything was about to detonate. Grant advanced toward him, feeling the collective hush grow heavier with each step. He was too furious, too protective to consider caution anymore. "Whatever you think you're doing, it ends here," he said, voice low but resonant enough for the watchers to catch. A slow, dangerous grin tugged at Darius's lips. "You can't stop me. Didn't you see what just happened? Every lens in this room is waiting for my final word, and I have plenty of documents to show them, enough to bury you, your reputation, and the little family you so desperately want to hide." Grant swallowed the hot surge of anger. "Go ahead, show them. If you have proof, if you want to ruin me, get it over with." Vanessa placed a hand lightly on Grant's arm, trying to calm him. "Grant," he shot her a sideways look of reassurance. "Let him wave those documents all he wants. He's incriminating himself by revealing his blackmail in front of all these people." Darius laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Sharp, confident, full of scorn. "Incriminating myself? That's quite a reversal. Wait until everyone hears how you forced poor Vanessa to raise a child alone, while you gallivanted around the globe." Vanessa stepped forward, no longer willing to let Darius define the narrative. "You had no right to expose Ethan like this," she said, fierce and trembling at once. "And you had no right to corner Grant into illegal deals. We know what your shady contracts look like." A flicker of annoyance sparked in Darius's eyes, though he tried to mask it with feigned indifference. "Such accusations. Where's your proof?" He wagged the folder. "All I see is evidence of Grant Morgan's hypocrisy." The growing crowd seemed enthralled by this standoff. Nobody hid their curiosity. Billionaire secrets, blackmail, a sensational fatherhood scandal. They watched with rapt attention, drawn like moths to a flame. At last, Winston edged closer, holding up his phone in plain sight. "There's plenty of proof, Darius," he said. "You threatened Grant multiple times tonight. Some of us caught it on video, and we have documents from the staff rooms that you left behind." He made a show of tapping the phone's screen. "Would you like me to share them with the press right now?" Darius glowered, scanning the ring of onlookers as though measuring the risk. It was clear he hadn't expected the possibility that Grant's team might have turned the tables. "Don't play games you can't win," he snapped. "I assure you, my reach goes beyond these walls." Grant gave a curt nod to Winston. "Let's not provoke a full media frenzy in the middle of the hall. This can still end without further damage, if Darius leaves peacefully and takes his threats with him." Leo chose that moment to step forward, his imposing frame cutting through the crowd. Two of Darius's henchmen stood near the pillar, hands twitching at their sides. The memory of the last scuffle still vivid, Leo eyed them with professional cool. "If you try anything," he warned, "you'll be facing charges of assault, extortion, and possibly worse." The room's hush broke, replaced by a rising tide of anxious chatter. Several reporters, cameras in hand, pressed in. "Mr. Morgan, do you have a response to these allegations?" one asked. "Is it true you have a child you never acknowledged?" piped up another. Grant could feel every lens turning on him, hungry for a meltdown or a sensational quote. Vanessa looked torn, wanting to shield Grant from the bombardment, but he placed a steadying hand over hers, then faced the cameras. "Ethan is my son," he said quietly, projecting as much calm as he could muster. "I only learned the truth tonight. I made mistakes, but I never abandoned him knowingly. Everything else you're hearing, these claims Darius is making, are twisted to serve his blackmail scheme." A wave of excited murmurs rippled through the throng of onlookers, the flashes intensifying like staccato lightning. Darius let out a scoff, brandishing a document from his folder. "Look here," he said, voice pitched to Carrie. "I have proof that Vanessa Monroe tried contacting you, Grant, on multiple occasions, but you never responded. You never even—" "That doesn't matter now," Vanessa interjected, voice firm. "Any history between Grant and me is separate from your illegal demands. Don't pretend you're doing this for me or Ethan. You're doing it to force Grant into signing your deals." Darius's lips curled in a sneer. "You think anyone will care about the specifics once the tabloids run the story? They'll see a powerful CEO who left his lover pregnant and alone. The details will be lost in the noise." Grant's knuckles whitened, but he drew a slow breath, determined not to let his anger overshadow reason. "I'll deal with whatever consequences come from telling the truth," he said. "But I'll never sign your dirty contracts, and I won't let you threaten Vanessa or Ethan." A sudden commotion arose at the far side of the hall. Grant peered past the line of guests to see a young staffer sprint in, breathless, waving for someone's attention. She reached Vanessa first, leaning in to whisper urgently. Vanessa's eyes widened and she gasped. "What? Right now?" The staffer nodded frantically. "He's looking for you. He slipped past the caretaker. Please come. He seems really scared." Grant's heart lurched, certain who the staffer meant. Ethan. He must have sensed all the commotion or gotten spooked by the swirling rumors. Without a second thought, Grant told Vanessa, "Go to him. Make sure he's safe." She flashed him a torn look, obviously reluctant to leave him locked in this confrontation. But Ethan came first. "I'll be right back," she managed, hurrying off with the staffer. For a split second, the crowd parted enough to glimpse the small figure of a boy near the corridor entrance, looking wide-eyed at the unfamiliar crowd. Then Vanessa rushed him away to a quieter corner of the building. Darius's expression twisted, seeing the sympathy directed at a frightened child. "Your little family reunion won't save you," he growled. "I have more than enough to bury you in legal trouble, Morgan." Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice so the entire hall wouldn't hear every word. "If you're so confident, do it now. Show the world your so-called proof. Then watch how quickly the authorities investigate the rest of your operation." Darius's eyes flicked to Winston's phone, still filming from the sideline, and the watchful posture of Leo nearby. Even the reporters, though drawn to a potential scandal, sensed that something deeper was unfolding, something that might not paint Darius in a flattering light. Realizing he was in a corner, Darius snapped his folder shut. "Maybe I'll handle this in private after all," he said icily, glancing at his henchman. "But don't think we're finished." In a sweeping motion he turned to stride away, his men flanking him. A path cleared as they cut through the onlookers, heading toward a side exit. Grant felt a wave of weary relief, though he kept his guard up, suspecting Darius wouldn't leave quietly. Sure enough, halfway to the exit, Darius paused. His gaze locked on Grant, hatred flaring. With a guttural curse, he dropped the folder on a nearby table and lunged forward. The movement was so sudden that half the crowd gasped. One of his henchmen followed, arms outstretched like a linebacker ready to tackle. Grant barely had time to brace himself before a heavy fist swung toward his face. He dodged by instinct, feeling the punch whoosh past his ear. In the swirl of expensive suits, shimmering gowns, and camera flashes, chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scrambled back, forming a frantic circle. Leo moved in a flash, intercepting the second henchman, who aimed a blow at Grant's midsection. Their scuffle sent chairs toppling, glass smashing. Darius, spitting curses, swung again at Grant, this time connecting a glancing blow to his shoulder. The impact jarred him, but adrenaline pounded in Grant's veins. He countered with a jab that caught Darius in the side. Meanwhile, Winston, phone abandoned, tried to contain the fray, urging people to stay back. A staff member wailed about the risk of further damage to the venue's priceless decor. None of it mattered. Only finishing this fight before someone got seriously hurt. Another punch grazed Grant's cheek. He tasted copper on his tongue and forced himself not to flinch. He feinted, then hooked his arm around Darius's torso, using momentum to unbalance him. Darius staggered. Their shoes squeaked on the polished floor, and they nearly crashed into a pedestal displaying a crystal vase. The henchmen, for their part, struggled against Leo's unyielding grip. One managed to break free, lunging for Winston, who dodged behind a toppled chair. Shouts mingled with the clatter of broken glass. Cameras still flashed sporadically. Someone in the crowd was capturing every second of the mayhem, no doubt for viral headlines. Grant locked eyes with Darius, both men panting. "You're done," Grant growled, seizing Darius by the lapels of his suit. "No more threats, no more blackmail. You're finished." Darius sneered through clenched teeth. "I'll destroy you, Morgan. You and your precious son." Grant's patience snapped. He heaved Darius backward, forcing him to stumble into a row of chairs. The man landed hard, breath coming in wheezing gasps. 2 security guards arrived, quickly restraining him before he could lunge again. Another pair of guards cornered the henchman, who'd finally stopped resisting once they realized they were severely outnumbered. Chest heaving, Grant stood over Darius, a swirl of raw anger and triumphant relief in his system. The entire hall watched as the guards pinned Darius's arms back, leaving him glaring up at Grant with undiluted malice. Cameras clicked. Then the crowd parted again, and Vanessa appeared, holding Ethan's small hand. The boy looked terrified by the noise and the sight of his father standing there with blood on his lip, the tension thick enough to cut. Vanessa kept a protective arm around Ethan's shoulder, heart in her eyes as she took in the mess. The toppled chairs, scattered papers, the shattered glass on the marble floor. Grant's pulse drummed in his ears, but the moment he saw Ethan's frightened gaze, everything else seemed to fade. Pushing aside the chaos, he turned to them, reaching out gently. "It's okay," he murmured, though his voice shook. "It's going to be okay." Ethan stepped closer, eyes darting uncertainly. Vanessa's expression mirrored the boy's fear and concern. Amid the swirl of stunned onlookers, the overhead lights felt painfully bright. Flashes from phone cameras flickered. No one spoke. Darius, pinned by security, spat another insult, but it was drowned by the hush that had settled on the crowd's collective breath. Grant realized he couldn't leave things like this, an abrupt, violent confrontation that only hinted at the truth. Darius might be subdued, but the rumors and half-truths would spin out of control. He needed to set the record straight, no matter how messy or painful it was. He caught Vanessa's gaze, then looked down at Ethan. A fierce protectiveness welled in him, along with regret for every moment he'd missed in the boy's life. But in that regret lay a resolute promise. No more running, no more secrets. "Call the police," Winston told a staff member, gestures urgent. "We need them to sort out the charges." Grant heard Winston's words as though from a distance. He nodded faintly, then turned to Vanessa and Ethan. They were battered by stress and fear, but still standing. Strength shone in Vanessa's face. She nodded back, giving him silent permission. Grant looked at Vanessa, then at Ethan. "This ends now," he murmured, stepping into the glow of the main stage, prepared to reveal the truth before everyone. Grant stepped onto the small, makeshift stage, still catching his breath from the scuffle with Darius and his men. His shoulder throbbed where a punch had glanced off the bone, and a sharp sting on his cheek told him a bruise would soon bloom. Even so, he squared his shoulders against the pain and addressed the hushed crowd before him. Cameras continued to click. Reporters whispered urgently among themselves. In the far corner, security guards pinned Darius's men, who glowered but made no further moves. Darius himself had been hauled upright, gripping his injured arm while raging in low, bitter curses. His face was twisted, caught somewhere between hatred and desperate calculation. Vanessa and Ethan stood just off to the side of the stage, partially shielded by Winston and Leo, who were both watchful, ready to intervene if anything else spun out of control. The boy trembled, and Vanessa knelt beside him, whispering soft reassurances. Yet she, too, felt all eyes upon them, anxiously awaiting what Grant would say. The entire spectacle of the night, polished auction attendees in designer attire, priceless art arranged on pedestals, shattered glass from the fight, formed a surreal backdrop for the drama unfolding like a final act in a long play. Grant gripped the microphone, forcing himself to meet the collective gaze of the watchers. He was done hiding, done letting Darius or fear control the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice echoing through the tall rafters, "I'm sorry your evening turned into this. You came for an elegant auction, and instead you witnessed fights and threats." He paused, drawing in a breath. "I won't keep you long, but I need to be absolutely clear about a few things." A ripple of uneasy anticipation went through the assembled guests. Some still clutched their auction programs. A few discreetly pressed the record buttons on their phones. More reporters edged forward, cameras aloft. Grant pressed on. "First, I have a son. His name is Ethan, and until tonight, I didn't know he was mine." He glanced over at the boy, whose dark eyes blinked with innocent confusion. Vanessa hovered protectively. "In my past, I made mistakes," Grant continued. "I left for a business expansion overseas and lost contact with someone very dear to me, Vanessa Monroe. She tried to reach me, but by the time I realized how badly I'd failed her, I believed I had no way to fix it. It turns out I also failed to discover that I had a child." A murmur of surprise, laced with sympathy, threaded through the onlookers. Some angled their phones to capture both Grant and the boy in the same frame. Others simply watched, expressions a mix of curiosity and empathy. Grant's eyes swept across the faces in the front row, lingering for a moment on Darius. "That failure is on me," Grant said. "I'll carry that guilt and do whatever it takes to repair the damage. But let's be clear, none of this was Darius's business to exploit. He's threatened me, threatened Vanessa, and threatened to expose Ethan's identity in the press, all for the sake of forcing me into criminal agreements." Darius tried to speak, but a security guard pulled him back. A low rumble went through the crowd, bristling at the idea of blackmail involving a child. Sensing the shift in the room's sentiment, Darius muttered something unintelligible, face red and furious. Grant raised a hand, drawing attention back to himself. "I want everyone here to understand. I'm not a perfect man, but I refuse to be blackmailed. Darius wanted me to sign fraudulent contracts, money laundering schemes that would funnel illegal funds through my business. When I said no, He threatened to ruin my name. His voice hardened. He told me he'd make the press believe I willingly abandoned my son. Cameras flashed again, capturing every flicker of determination on Grant's face. A hush took hold, thick with the tension of 1,000 questions. At the edge of the stage, Winston locked eyes with Grant, phone in hand, ready to publicly share the recorded evidence of Darius's threats, if the moment called for it. "That ends here," Grant said, leaning into the mic, "because rather than let this blackmailer spin lies, I'd rather stand in front of everyone tonight and acknowledge my son openly. Vanessa and I will figure out the rest, together." A wave of reaction swept across the audience. Some openly clapped in support, others stared in shock, and a few dabbed at their eyes with tissues, moved by the raw sincerity of the moment. The tension, though still present, seemed to shift into something hopeful, a sense that truth was finally seeing the light. Grant carefully handed off the microphone to an event assistant, then offered his hand to Ethan, who peeked around Winston's legs. The boy hesitated, small fingers gripping the air uncertainly, until Vanessa murmured, "It's okay," and nudged him forward. Ethan stepped up beside Grant, huge eyes scanning the crowd. The murmur of sympathy grew. Flashes from cameras lit up the stage. Kneeling down to be at eye level, Grant gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Hello," he said softly. "I'm Grant, your dad." It felt surreal to voice those words publicly, but Ethan only nodded with the solemnity of a child on the cusp of understanding. Vanessa joined them, resting a hand lightly on Grant's arm in a show of unity. Out in the crowd, Darius let out a derisive snort. "So touching," he spat, despite the guard restraining him. "But your PR spin won't fix the scandal I'm about to unleash." One or two reporters reflexively turned back to Darius, curious, but the rest kept their focus on Grant, Vanessa, and Ethan. The child buried his face against Grant's coat, as if wary of the lights and strangers. Grant's heart clenched with protectiveness. He shot one final glance at Darius, knowing the man still believed he had an ace up his sleeve. "Go ahead," Grant said, voice ringing clearly. "Release whatever you have. I've already given these people the truth." He stood, gaze flicking to Winston, who nodded, silently confirming he had all the blackmail evidence as well. Video, documents, timestamps. If Darius tried to bury Grant in scandal, Winston would bury Darius in criminal proof. Realizing the crowd's sympathy had shifted dramatically against him, Darius let out a bitter chuckle. His once smug posture drooped into something more desperate. "You'll regret this, Morgan," he seethed. "Mark my words." Grant ignored the threat, turning to the security guards. "Make sure the authorities see the evidence we've gathered," he said, voice calm. The guards nodded. Even the reporters sensed a new angle: corruption charges, blackmail ring, arrests, and began peppering questions at Darius, who tried to shield his face from the cameras. A commanding voice suddenly rose from the back of the hall, belonging to one of the event's major sponsors. "We won't tolerate blackmail at a charity function," she declared. "Mr. Morgan, if you need any legal or media support, you have it. This event was supposed to uplift communities, not tear people down." More voices chimed in agreement. Grant gave a nod of thanks, relief slipping into his expression. For the first time all night, it felt like the tide had turned for good. Vanessa stood quietly next to him, holding Ethan close. She blinked away tears, pressing her forehead against her son's soft hair. Cameras captured that tender moment with flashes that sparkled like starlight. Though the tension remained in the air, it had changed shape, no longer a fearsome threat, but the swirl of an uncertain future that might yet be shaped by courage and honesty. A reporter stepped forward, microphone extended, eyes bright with curiosity. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "you and Ms. Monroe look like you're standing together on this. Are you planning to address the public about your family situation?" Grant allowed himself a tight smile. Yes. In fact, I'm announcing tonight that I've established a fund, something to support single parents who face the challenges Vanessa once did. No one should have to face financial or social pressures alone. It's the least I can do to ensure our mistake, our missed connection, doesn't happen to others. A wave of applause rolled through the audience, some genuine, some polite, but all touched by the unexpected gesture. Vanessa shot Grant a look of quiet amazement and gratitude. She squeezed his hand, eyes brimming with emotion. Darius, witnessing the powerful shift in sentiment, let out another snarl and tried to yank free from the security guard's grip. He pointed an accusatory finger. This is all just a show. You think they won't care you vanished for 4 years while Vanessa raised your kid? A uniformed officer appeared at Darius's side, cutting him off. Sir, the officer said, calm but firm, we've received multiple complaints about your conduct tonight. We need you to come with us. The crowd parted to reveal more officers heading inside, likely called after the fight. Another was already speaking with the henchmen who'd caused such havoc, taking statements from shell-shocked staffers. Realizing the game was truly up, Darius's face went gray. He tried to protest, but the officer guided him toward the exit, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Flash after flash erupted from the cameras, capturing every angle of his downfall. Some guests whispered in shock. Others simply looked on, arms folded, wearing expressions of grim satisfaction. Within minutes, Darius and his men had been led away, leaving behind a hush that felt strange after so much tension. The auction hall had never seemed so large or so quiet. Broken glass and toppled chairs spoke wordless testimony to the violence earlier, while the painting stands and sculptures remained lit under the brilliant chandeliers. Grant stared after the police escort, shoulders sagging with relief. Then he felt a gentle tug at his sleeve, Ethan gazing up at him. "Are you okay?" the boy asked softly, voice barely above a whisper. Grant looked into his son's eyes, heart twisting with gratitude and guilt. "Yes, buddy. I'm okay." He crouched, placing a hand on Ethan's small shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to see all that. It was a mess." He caught Vanessa's gaze. "I'm sorry both of you had to go through this." Vanessa gave a weak smile. "We'll move forward. Together." Her words were quiet yet steady, carrying the weight of forgiveness and a promise of a new start. The hall's atmosphere gradually returned to a subdued version of normal. Reporters approached, but Winston and Leo skillfully steered them away, politely stating Grant would give an official statement later. Several philanthropic sponsors gathered around, offering hushed congratulations and support. For all its chaos, the night had revealed a side of Grant few had ever seen. A man willing to stand up for something more than his corporate interests. He reached out for Vanessa's hand, then gently took Ethan's in his other. The trio stood united, a fragile family in the aftermath of a tempest. They passed the remnants of expensive decorations and prized art, now overshadowed by the deeper human story that had played out. Step by step, they moved toward the exit, where fresh snow flurried beyond the glass doors, bright under the outdoor lights. Before pushing through the doors, Grant paused, feeling the crisp air seep in. The darkness outside was broken by lamps illuminating the swirling snow. He glanced down at Ethan, who clutched his new father's hand, uncertain yet oddly trusting. Vanessa stood on Ethan's other side, relieved but still processing the swirl of emotions unleashed tonight. Grant looked at them both, remembering how empty he'd once felt chasing success around the globe, how he'd put everything else on hold. Now he realized he had something far more precious to protect. Whatever chaos the coming days held, media headlines, corporate fallout, learning how to be a father, he knew he wouldn't trade it for anything. He exhaled, letting the tension drain. Cameras still flashed sporadically through the windows, capturing the last glimpses of the family as they left. Let them take their pictures, he thought, as he guided Vanessa and Ethan out into the softly drifting snow. let them speculate and gossip. The truth was finally out, and for once, that truth carried hope, not shame. A reporter called out as they passed, "Mr. Morgan, what's next for you?" He hesitated, glancing down at Ethan, then at Vanessa. With a small, private smile meant only for them, he replied, "A new beginning, that's what." Vanessa squeezed his hand, tears bright in her eyes, but she held her head high. Together they made their way toward the waiting car, ignoring the frantic swirl of questions behind them. The cold winter air tingled, but a shared warmth of purpose and belonging pushed away the chill. In that final moment, as the car door opened and they stepped inside, Grant thought of all he had learned tonight, about family, about confrontation, about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. He gathered Vanessa and Ethan close, heart thudding with a sense of reverent gratitude. Of all the victories and deals he had pursued across continents and boardrooms, none compared to what he had found tonight. And with that realization glowing in his mind, he whispered the truth he'd come to understand. "Of everything I've gained, nothing is more valuable than what I found tonight." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.